Chapter 10 A Most Monstrous Adventure by Cormorant Jaggles. The year was 1285. War had erupted between Galliminia and the mighty Grochucan Empire. Of the 12 kingdoms of Ganvor, 6 were caught up in fierce and ferocious conflict, 5 remained neutral, and 1 was on the verge of siding with the Empire. The future of Ganvor lay in the balances, and it was impossible to discern which way things would go. All had begun when Morbrond, 8th Emperor of Grochuca, had launched a sudden invasion on Galliminia. It was probably due to our perceived weakness that our nation was selected by the Emperor. Mesonestia, to the east of the Empire, would be a very difficult land to conquer, what with its perilous jungles and indomitable dendromines. Impossible! And Algan-Callad, to the south of the Empire, is far too great and mighty a kingdom to subdue. So it was Galliminia that seemed the obvious target for imperial expansion, and a fleet of warships was dispatched across the sea. What the Empire did not expect was that our neighbours would rally to our cause. Boromir, and later Marduria, entered into a timely alliance with our besieged kingdom, and joined forces with our flagging troops. Together, we expelled the foreign armies out of our country and pushed them back across the sea. Her Majesty the Queen decreed that we should push back the forces to Kendom itself, that we might elicit a full surrender from the Emperor and ensure any future attack on us was out of the question. As I write, battles are raging right across the southern reaches of Grochuca, and our armies are making slow but steady progress towards the capital. Meanwhile, our gallant air force bombards the city with frequent air raids, and our Royal Armada patrols the extensive coastal regions. Although we appear to have the upper hand at present, there is a strong possibility of Macaria joining the war, which would tip the balances in Grochuca's favour. Whatever happens, it is, in my opinion, absolutely critical that we capture the city of Kendom before the year is out. Essential. What is my part in all this? I am an officer in the Intelligence Division, a department set up by Her Majesty for the purposes of espionage and surveillance. One particular individual had been singled out for intensive observation by my superiors, a certain Barracus of Kendom. The name of Barracus had been connected to the development of a secret new weapon, upon which my superiors very much wanted to lay their hands. Consequently, I was sent into the Empire to keep a close eye upon this Barracus, and if possible, to acquire an example of his powerful new invention. The trail led me to Gruken-Golga, the fortress of Prince Vorkrond, where I hoped to catch a glimpse of the master spy. Unfortunately, I was spotted by a Grochucan scout as I lay hidden in some bushes, and I was sent at once to see Vorkrond himself. It was a most interesting experience meeting the Emperor's ambitious young heir, as well as all his assorted associates. Fascinating. I was kept in his tower for a number of days, and was interrogated on more than one occasion. I found Vorkrond to be a most intriguing young fellow. Obsessive, determined, and ruthlessly single-minded, he seemed to have a fervent dislike for his father, and wanted to win glory for himself by personally bringing about the Empire's victory. He asked me a great many questions about Galliminia and our military strategy, but I was able to conceal both the purpose of my mission and the fact that I am a Halvirandus. Barracus himself I never saw, and Mr. Clestus, the prince's chief adviser, I glimpsed only once. Mostly I enjoyed the company of 2 twin servants, named Palagash and Palagosh, and a diminutive butler named Smibbles. In spite of my age and appearance, I somehow managed to persuade the prince that I was not a spy, and I was transferred over to the fortress, where prisoners of war were being detained. I was, however, brought back to the tower every couple of days for further questioning. Infuriating. Not long later, one of the 5 generals arrived at Gruken-Golga, General Lord Montagolin. I think it would be fair to say that we didn't exactly get on together from the outset, but he's an honourable enough fellow. Through the devious scheming of Barracus, a small group of us were lured into escaping from the fortress, unaware that the guards were intentionally allowing us to break free. By the time at which my story commences, we had reached the kingdom of Galvia, shaken off Barracus along the way, and sadly lost 2 of our company, one to the terrors of Gruken-Ulcus, and one in the jungles of Mesonestia. There were now 9 of us altogether, a butler, a farmer, and a waiter, an innkeeper, a blacksmith, and a businessman, a Baromian, the general, and my own dear self, Professor Cormorant Jaggles. Although it seemed that our journey was almost at an end, we were soon to discover that our troubles were far from over. Galvia is a most appealing little country, quite charming. Its inhabitants are diverse and varied, ranging from the enormous gigantic Obedines to the fascinating little Iorians. Its landscape is pleasant and attractive, with rolling hills, peaceful meadows, and quaint little villages. Nowadays the monarchy is largely ceremonial. In practice, the kingdom is governed by an elected council with representatives from each of the 5 people groups, and the country seldom involves itself in anything beyond its own borders. I had only visited the kingdom on a couple of occasions before, once for a holiday and once on a research trip, and both times I had found it perfectly delightful. However, I was acutely aware that there were many dangers lurking beneath the surface. We passed into Galvia on the 7th day of the 13th month, commonly known as Ranvin. The weather was still rather warm and humid, though thankfully the climate would soon begin to shift, and morale was reasonably high. We travelled along in a Macarian cart of moderate comfort, with Ramkhan the Baromian as our driver. Conversation was proceeding roughly along the following lines. Hector's inquired, "How many days will it take us to reach Galamenia?" I replied, 3 days at most if we don't encounter any trouble. To which Hector's exclaimed, "Fantastic! We should be back in time for the winter feast then. I love the winter feast, I do. The lights, the songs, the games, the food, not to mention all the gifts. You never know, maybe we'll even have a bit of snow. It doesn't feel like winter at the moment though, does it?" MacFiber answered, "The weather will be changing soon enough, boy. We're leaving the sunny climes of mid-Ganvor now, back to the cold and drizzle of the south." I remarked, "At least you don't live in Boromia. It's winter all year round there, snow and ice for a full 18 months. Frightful. There is something rather striking about it, though." Algothian mused, "I can't wait to get back to dear old Galamenia. There's so much I miss. The farm, the meadows, the fields, the inn, the choir, the concerts at the village hall, games of tucker-on and Galamine food, lamb hot pot, roast goose, batter puddings, plum pie, strawberry tart, syrup sponge. Simple pleasures. But most of all I pine for my darling Carina. I suppose we won't be able to stay home for very long though, will we? We'll be posted back to the front, I suppose. What's the plan, General?" The General responded, "We shall all go first to Barradine and report to Her Majesty. We must impart to her our information about Baracus and his plot, and warn of a possible alliance between Macaria and the Empire. We shall convene a council of the generals, and if possible, I shall endeavour to gain approval for a direct attack on Grukengalga. Once captured, we can use it as a stronghold and push to Kendum from a second direction. It won't be easy getting everyone to agree, though. They can be a stubborn lot, those other generals. Paris, Melbin, Orandus, and Kethero, but I think I'll have the ear of the Queen." The voice of Ramkhan called out from the front, "Small village coming up ahead, General. Shall we be stopping for provisions?" The General asked, "What sort of village? Human? Torbrond? Alvern?" To which Ramkhan called back, "Iorian. Only a small one, General. 15 houses at most." The General turned to me and said, "What do you think, Jaggles? I haven't had many dealings with the Iorians. Friendly folk, are they?" I offered the reply, "The ones I've met have been. Charming folk, as a matter of fact. Delightful. They're very generous by all accounts. We may well be able to stock up for the remainder of the journey." The General concluded, "Right then, Ramkhan, pull into the left here. Let's pay a visit to these Iorians." It would probably be best if I provided a brief description of the Iorians, for their numbers have certainly been diminishing of late. At one time they could be found throughout the northerly regions of Galamenia, but they are confined almost exclusively to Galvia these days. Iorians stand about 4 feet tall and have large golden wings. The males have long flowing beards and two rather striking horns growing from their heads. Iorian feet are webbed for swimming, and they have exceptionally good hearing. They are a most remarkable people, I am bound to say, wise and intelligent, gracious and peace-loving, and very fast both in the air and in the water. It was a real privilege to meet some of them again. As we made our approach to the little village, one of the Iorians emerged from his cottage, bowed down before us, and called out in a loud, hearty voice, "Hail, weary travellers! You are most welcome in our humble village. Come and meet us on our village green." The General looked at me and smiled, saying, "It seems you were right, Professor. They seem a very hospitable folk indeed." The village green was easy enough to find, a large square field bordered by pretty orange flowers, with a towering oak tree in the centre. Under the tree was a large stone table, and 5 or 6 Iorians were sitting around it, looking at us expectantly. They beckoned us over with a friendly wave of the hand. One of them rose and saluted us with a cheery, "Welcome, friends. You must be the Galameans from Grucongolga. Do not look surprised, friends. News travels fast between the Iorians. We are hidden everywhere in this part of Galvia, and have rather good hearing. You were overheard as you travelled along in that cart of yours. Do not worry, friends. We will aid you on your journey. My name is Swallowtail, and I am the chief of this village." The General boomed back, "You are very kind, Mr. Swallowtail. We are most grateful." The Iorian paused, looked intently at the General, and posed the question, "Am I right in thinking that you are General Montagolin?" The General confirmed, "It's General Lord Montagolin, actually, but yes, you are quite correct." Swallowtail continued, "I have a grave warning for you, Lord General. You should know that Grochukans have been sighted within our borders. Dozens of them, according to reports. We have heard their conversations, and they have mentioned you by name, Lord General. I believe you may be in severe danger. We shall, of course, be reporting the matter to the Grand Council. There is not much that we Iorians can do about it, I am afraid. We have no skill in fighting, nor any inclination for it, but we do not like having Grochukans in our homeland. Perhaps the Oberdines will do something about it, but be very wary, Lord General. The Grochukans are out to get you." The General thanked Swallowtail profusely for his warning. Swallowtail added, "There is one other warning I wish to give you, Lord General. The path you are taking will lead directly into the territory of the Oberdines. I advise you to be very cautious, Lord General. The Oberdines themselves should not cause you too much of a problem, but it is not just the people who are giants in their regions. I would pass through the territory as quickly as you can if I were you, Lord General. It is not a safe path by any means. But now, weary travellers, let us see if we can supply you with some refreshments." Forgetting the exceptional hearing of the Iorians, I whispered to young Hectorus that I hoped their food was better than that of the Dendromines. Swallowtail assured me, "You need not worry about that, sir. I think you will find our cuisine to be of a similar nature to your own. Show them to the storehouse, Lacewing." Half walking and half flying, one of the other Iorians took us over to an attractive yellow cottage and showed us inside. Quilk burst out with, "Snap my spine! There's enough here to last us a whole year. Tuna, salmon, haddock pie, mushrooms, parsnips. Wait a minute, where did you get those Caladine mint cakes?" Lacewing informed him, "Special delivery from our friend Monarch, a very resourceful fellow. Help yourselves, friends. We have a fresh supply every day, so take as much as you desire." It seemed that our food worries would be over once and for all. I, for one, was exceedingly glad that we had happened upon these courteous little people. When we returned outside, our bags laden with ample provisions, we saw another Iorian swoop down from the sky and land on a branch of the oak tree. Swallowtail called up, "What news from the north, Silkwing?" Silkwing declared, "Ill, I fear. More Grochukans have passed over the border. It could be a scouting party preparing for invasion.
Should we warn the other racers, do you think?
Swallowtail agreed.
That would be wise, Silkwing. Fly to the Oberdines with all haste and warn them of the danger. I myself will visit the humans, and Lacewing will inform the Torbrons. It may not come to the worst, but I think we should warn them all the same. Do forgive us, Lord General, but we must be away from here. We wish you well on your journey to Galamenia.
The General expressed his thankfulness.
You have been remarkably generous, Mr. Swallowtail. We are grateful both for your warnings and your liberal provisions.
It was rather a magnificent sight to observe the Iorians wing themselves up into the air and fly off into the distance with considerable grace and beauty. It had been a real honour to have met them once again. Anyhow, we loaded all our food into the cart and proceeded on our way. We hadn't gone many miles along the road when we were confronted with a rather ominous-looking sign, which announced somewhat starkly, Certia, se fu aurea obedanerve tireve, coste vernum. Ramkhan helpfully translated it for the sake of the others. Warning, you are now entering the land of the Oberdines. Beware of the wildlife. One inevitably started to wonder what manner of wildlife might have occasioned the need for such a sign, and Tando began to speculate wildly. But whatever the dangers, evening was now drawing in fast, and we would have to think about stopping for the night. The General called for everyone's attention, and launched into the following.
Men, it seems that we have Grochukans on our trail once again. In particular, it seems that I myself am the one that they are after. We must prepare for the worst, men. Even though we are not far from home now, I feel it prudent to appoint a second-in-command. Should the Grochukans succeed in recapturing me, one of you will need to take charge and report back to Her Majesty. News of Macaria must at all costs reach the Council of the Generals. I shall consider very carefully who is the most suitable candidate for the promotion, and I shall announce my decision in the morning. If any of you have anything you wish to say on the matter, I shall be most happy to hear from you.
A little later we set up camp in a little glen not far from the main road, and partook of a most exquisite supper put together by Mr. McFiber. When everyone was beginning to drop off to sleep, I made my approach to the General, and raised the subject of the second-in-command. "I'd like a quiet word with you, if I may, General." The General looked at me askance, saying,
"Go ahead. What is it, Jaggles?"
I hesitated for a moment, and told him, "I'd like to offer my thoughts concerning the promotion of which you spoke. I'm fully aware that I am not exactly in front running for the position. I'm hardly your favourite member of the company, I'm rather too old, and I'm not even in the army, technically. But as the most senior fellow in the company, and one whom the others look up to and respect, I believe I ought to have a say in the matter." The General sniffed loudly and proceeded along these lines.
"I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, Professor. We've quarrelled and bickered and vented forth our rage to one another, but I have come increasingly to respect you these last few days. You showed great courage and selflessness in coming back to rescue us at Gruken Ulcus, and you showed great discernment and perspicacity in believing Mr. Selvastro's story back in the jungle. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't found you utterly exasperating on the odd occasion or two, but I fear I may have misjudged you, Jaggles. I've been a stubborn, blind, and blundering fool all too often on our journey thus far. What is it you wish to say, Jaggles?"
A little startled by his compliments, I replied as follows. "As far as I see it, General, there are 1 or 2 members of our company to whom I would have grave misgivings about submitting. Firstly, there is Mr. Slank. I know he's a very dear friend of yours, and has shown great loyalty and dedication, but I do not believe he is a leader of men. I do not think he could show sufficient authority, nor do I believe he could win the respect of all the others. Then there is Mr. Algothian, a friendly enough fellow, and one can't pick a fault with his character or integrity, but he is far too laid back and casual. He wouldn't have the firmness and resolve necessary for a leader." The General acknowledged,
"Your sentiments are not all that dissimilar to my own. I would also discount Hector's for being rather too young, and Tando for lacking a backbone. And on reflection, I am not all that sure that Quilk is particularly dependable."
I stated, "That only leaves Mr. Ramkhan and Mr. McFiber. I think Mr. Ramkhan is disqualified by his being a Baromian, but Mr. McFiber is perhaps a little too fiery for the role." The General countered,
No, I think MacFiber is the most sensible choice of the lot. I know he has been rather insolent at times, but he is shrewd, cautious, and knows his own mind. Furthermore, I have no doubt he could exhibit the firmness and masterfulness required of a leader. How do you feel about my promoting him to sergeant?"
I sat and reflected for a couple of moments, and then conveyed my thoughts. "For once, General, I am in wholehearted agreement with you. I think Mr. MacFiber is the wisest choice for promotion. I do hope, of course, that we will have no need of his leadership, but what with Grochukans and Auberdeens and countless other dangers, one can't afford to be too careful, can one? You have my full approval and support, General." It was a pleasant change to have an agreeable conversation with the General for once. The death of Mr. Volko, a Mardorian who had travelled with us up until the jungles, seemed to have mellowed and softened him somewhat, and he had lost a little of his former bluster. I went off to find a quiet spot to sleep in for the night, laid my head against a small boulder, gazed up at Rendus as it shone brightly amidst a gallery of stars, and gradually sunk away into a deep sleep. I was the first person to awake the following morning, which was of course the 8th day of Ranvin. I decided to begin frying some fish for breakfast, and opted for the quicker method of employing Halvurandi to light the fire. I was unaware that Mr. Ramkhan had now arisen, and on observing my actions he gave me a long, thoughtful stare, and conversation unfolded thus. "You are very talented, Professor. It seems a great shame that your art has been outlawed in both of our countries. It could be coming in very useful as a weapon of warfare." "No, Mr. Ramkhan. Halvurandi is not to be used for things like that. It should never be used for military purposes, except in the most extreme emergencies."
"Why not? Are the Grochukans knowing the secrets of Halvurandi?"
"Not as far as I am aware, Mr. Ramkhan."
"Then consider what a valuable asset it could be to us. We could be wiping the Grochukans from the face of Ganvor."
"You speak very violently, Mr. Ramkhan. A peaceful solution is far more preferable to extermination, is it not?"
"I am sorry, Mr. Jaggles. War is in my blood. The Zebaniahs have been a warrior family for countless generations. I am just wishing we could be rid of these Grochukans once and for all."
The voice of Algothian drifted over towards us. "Is that some fish I can smell, Professor? Splendid! For some reason I'm famished. I could swallow a shark whole, I could." Quilk chimed in. "Breakfast up, is it? Nice one, Professor. That was the best sleep I've had for ages." Soon all 9 of us were sitting around the fire, gobbling down copious amounts of fish, courtesy of the Iorians, and chatting away chirpily. Hectus raised the subject of the promotion. "Have you come to a decision yet, sir?" The General enlightened him.
"Indeed I have, Hectus, indeed I have. I am pleased to announce that Mr. Kestrel MacFiber is henceforth raised to the rank of sergeant."
Slank seemed to balk at this announcement, and cried out,
"Mr. MacFiber, sir? I am stunned. I always thought you abhorred insolence."
To which came the reply,
"Indeed I do, my dear Slank. But I also admire wisdom, sagacity, and independent thinking. And you'd better be careful what you say about Sergeant MacFiber from now on. He's your superior."
MacFiber gave his reaction to the news.
"I am honoured and touched, sir. I shall try to carry out my duties as effectively as I can."
The General clarified,
"I hope, of course, you won't have any duties. I intend to keep myself firmly away from the hands of the enemy, but it seems they have me as their primary target, so it's best to prepare for the worst."
Hector's commented, "I think it's a very good choice, sir. Congratulations, Mr. MacFiber." Algothian chipped in with, "I heartily agree. A very sensible decision, sir. I thoroughly approve." At this point, Tando blurted out in a rather panic-stricken voice,
"Can anyone else hear that buzzing noise?"
Quilk groaned, "Can't hear a thing, mate. Your ears are playing tricks on you." Tando insisted,
"No, listen! There it is again! A definite buzzing in the distance."
We all strained our ears to the utmost, and all credit to young Tando. There was indeed a faint buzzing noise that was slowly becoming louder and louder. Algothian dismissed it with a casual, "It's probably nothing to worry about. I expect it's something perfectly harmless." Hectorus, however, sprang to his feet and shouted out, "No, look everyone, look, over there, coming right towards us." Quilk cried out, "Burn me alive, it's, get up and run everyone, run like the wind." To my extreme horror, I finally caught sight of what Mr. Hectorus was pointing to. Swarming towards us at a quite alarming rate were some hideous creatures of truly monumental proportions. There is no other way to describe them. They were utterly colossal, enormous, gigantic, a vast swarm of monstrous, horrifying wasps, and they were heading straight in our direction. Running was the only sensible pursuit to engage in. The voice of Quilk sounded forth from over the hill. "Into the house, gents, it's our only hope." As I bolted over the hill, I saw what Quilk was referring to. Standing in the middle of the valley was an immense white cottage, presumably the abode of some massive aubergine. We fled towards it with almost superhuman effort, and dived for cover through the open doorway. The general started barking out his orders.
"Close the door, men, close the door. Come along, everyone, pitch in. It'll take all 9 of us to get this thing shut."
Mastering every ounce of energy in our bodies, we all threw ourselves against the huge aubergine door, and with great strain and struggle, we eventually managed to get it firmly and securely shut. Just seconds later, an angry buzzing surrounded the cottage, and we saw scores of wasps hovering furiously by the window. The general's orders continued.
"Scour the room, men. Make sure there aren't any holes anywhere. Get a move on, men, get a move on."
Together we carried out a most meticulous and thorough examination of the room, checking every inch of the skirting and surveying all the walls for cracks and crevices, until we concluded that we were relatively safe for the time being. Slank drew our attention back to the wasps. "They seem awfully keen to get in, sir. Why are they pursuing us so resolutely?" MacFiber furnished us with the answer. "They're on a hunt, Slank. Always hunting swarms, those monsters. They prey on flesh. Humans, cattle, horses, tulkins, anything they can get their vile stings into." Rather predictably, Tando articulated his feelings on the extreme unpleasantness of the situation. "How horrid. It's the stuff of nightmares. This is one of my very worst dreams come true." Fatigued by our flight, I slumped down onto the hard wooden floor and gazed around the giant room in which we found ourselves. I had never seen anything quite like it before. The scale of the place was truly incredible. The armchair beside me was taller than a typical Galamine house, while the table in front of me was easily the height of Baltham City Hall. On the left-hand wall was a towering bookcase full of ancient volumes, each one alone being the size of an ordinary tabletop. Over on the far side of the room was another gigantic door, from which young Hectorus now came running back with a worried expression on his face. He disclosed the reason for his concern. "You'll never guess what I've just seen, sir. An enormous centipede. It's out there in the kitchen." MacFiber offered his advice. "Dangerous brute, centipedes. We'd best get out of sight, sir. If he comes in here, we're done for." The general wasted no time in issuing his commands.
"Up on the table, men. We ought to be safe up there. Come along, everyone."
Quilk wasn't convinced. "How do you propose we get up there, sir? Sprout a couple of wings?" Ramkhan supplied the solution.
"We have a rope, Mr. Quilk. I can be tying it to one of my knives and firing it up to the tabletop."
The general directed some words to the rest of us.
"Get that kitchen door closed, men. Quick as we can, men, quick as we can."
Another heroic effort soon had the door clicked firmly shut, and one by one we hauled ourselves up Mr. Ramkhan's rope. The top of the aubergine's table was a truly bizarre world indeed. An unnerving assortment of oversized food and crockery was scattered across the tablecloth, and made one feel rather disconcerted. There was a loaf of bread as large as a bed, a jug of water big enough to swim in, and a bowl of soup the size of a bath. It was all rather uncanny. As I wandered about this extraordinary landscape, I suddenly became aware of a loud thudding upon the window. It seemed the wasps had started banging themselves angrily against the glass. Slank aired his concern. "They seem utterly determined to gain entry, sir. Do you think the glass will hold?" The general voiced optimism.
"I'm sure aubergine glass will be more than a match for them."
Tando panicked.
"We're trapped in here now, though. How are we going to get out again? We can't stay in here forever."
Algothian put his hand on Tando's shoulder and sought to reassure him. "We'll think of something, brother. I'm sure those wasps will give up eventually." Hector's raised the alarm again.
Sir, the centipede, sir! It's squeezing through the crack under the door!
The General tried to allay his fears.
Don't worry, Hector's. He won't be able to see us up here.
I wouldn't be so sure, sir. He's coming this way.
I peered over the edge of the table and shuddered violently as I glimpsed the gruesome monster scuttling across the floor towards us. It must have been at least 5 feet long, with 30 hideous legs and truly frightful-looking jaws. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was terrified out of my wits. The General bawled out,
All right, men, arm yourselves. Quilk and McFiber, grab that table fork over there. Hector's and Algothian, you get hold of the knife. We'll soon fend him off.
Slank reported,
It's coming up the table leg, sir.
The General exhorted,
Brace yourselves, men.
The appalling head of the centipede appeared at the corner of the tabletop. I felt another ripple of horror shooting down my spine. Seeing it clamber its way onto the tablecloth was a most repulsive and unsettling sight. It really did make one squirm. Quilk and McFiber lunged forward with their fork and gave it a powerful prod in one of its segments. The centipede thrashed up and down in pain and retreated a couple of steps. Hector's and Algothian came at it from the other side and struck it with the knife, but the creature was not going to give up easily. It swiped sideways at Quilk and McFiber and tried to jab them with its terrible front claws. Ramkhan and the General came running over with another fork and charged at the centipede with considerable fury. 2 sharp prods sent the monster scurrying back down the table leg, but we felt sure it would be back for more. It was all too much for Tando.
This is more than I can stand. What a house of horrors! I never thought such a ghastly place as this could really exist.
Quilk made the unhelpful observation.
Don't look up there then, mate. There's a whopping great spider lurking up in the corner. Don't think she's seen us, though. Wouldn't like to get on the wrong side of that, I can tell you.
I turned attention to the matter of escape. How are we going to get out of here, General? We can't remain up here for all eternity. Slank suddenly emitted the cry,
I say, did anyone else hear that?
There was a general chorus of what? Slank elaborated thus,
The most terrific thud upstairs.
Tando burst into his customary histrionics.
I dread to think what that could be. A giant rat the size of a cow, an overgrown stag beetle with horns as big as a reindeer's.
As another 2 thuds shook the ceiling, Quilk opined,
Much bigger than that, mate. I think it's an Oberdeen.
Tando squealed,
Just what we need. Do Oberdeens eat humans, Professor?
I reassured him, Not to my knowledge, Tando, but they're rather dangerous fellows all the same. Best to avoid them if one possibly can. We began to hear a steady, regular stomping noise. Evidently the Oberdeen was starting to descend the staircase. I counselled, We'd better make ourselves scarce. Where can we hide, I wonder? Quilk proposed,
What about this saucepan? As long as we leave the lid slightly open, we should be just fine.
Without any dilly-dallying, we all scrambled up into said saucepan, which, though empty, had a rather pungent smell about it, and we dragged the lid over our heads, leaving only the smallest crack to breathe through. The Oberdeen came thudding through the door and grunted rather loudly. With deafening loudness he bellowed,
Stupid wasps! What you after this time, eh?
Hoisting myself up and peeping through the crack, I watched the Oberdeen as it set a large grey bag on the table and started collecting miscellaneous items from around the room. He muttered to himself,
Half a pound of cheese, knife and dagger, bottle of water, fruitcake, wasp tray, box of matches, packet of fudge.
Each item was carefully placed inside the bag and ticked off in a huge notebook that the Oberdeen was carrying. It seemed that he was setting out on a journey. A brilliant idea came flashing into my mind. I turned to the General and whispered, I know how we can get out of here. It's the only foolproof way I can think of. We must conceal ourselves in the Oberdeen's bag and let him transport us to safety. Those horrid wasps won't be able to get us in there. Quilk objected. What if the Oberdeen finds us, though? I don't much fancy ending up as his supper. I reasoned with him. Those wasps show no signs of giving up, do they? We simply must extract ourselves somehow or other. The bag's our only hope. Algothian raised a misgiving. But how do we know where the Oberdeen's going? It could be miles and miles before he sets us down again. I argued, anything's got to be better than staying in here. He's hardly likely to leave the country anyway. You never know. He may even take us closer to the border. Tando piped up.
It's not going to be very comfortable in that bag, though, is it? We'd be rattled about like sweets in a jar.
I asserted. Comfort's the least of our worries, my dear fellow. Who knows what other menacing creatures may be skulking in this terrible house? Earwigs? Cockroaches? Giant ants? Ramkhan pronounced his judgment.
The Professor speaks wisdom, General. We should be giving it a go.
The General gave his agreement to the plan, and we now started looking for an opportunity to dash across the table. The Oberdeen was continuing to pack his bag with an assortment of articles from around the room, speaking to himself as he did so.
Sauces, herbs, spices, oil, frying pan, vinegar, box of eggs. Now where did I put that tin of treacle? Must be here somewhere.
As the Oberdeen tramped out into the kitchen in search of the treacle, we seized the moment to sprint over the tabletop to his rapidly filling bag. We settled down amidst the various jars and packets and tried our utmost not to make a single noise. It has to be said that one was finding the entire experience more than a little detrimental to one's nerves. The hulking Oberdeen soon came clumping back into the living room, crammed a few more bits and pieces into his bag, and clasped it firmly shut. Next moment, we felt ourselves being lifted into the air amidst a noisy jangling of tins and bottles, all of us suffering more than our fair share of bumps and bruises as a result. I managed to perch myself on top of the tin of treacle, and arranged myself into as comfortable position as I was ever likely to obtain. Our unwitting rescuer carried us forward to the front of the cottage, opened the door, and vigorously fired some of his spray at those troublesome wasps. Safe and secure inside the bag, we were marched across the valley, and journeyed off into the unknown. It was rather difficult to keep track of time as we joggled along. It could have been anything from 40 minutes to a couple of hours, but after a considerable quantity of clunking, scraping, bashing, and sliding around, we were finally set back down upon the ground. Quilk communicated his joy as he squeezed out between the clasps.
Fresh air again at last. What a relief. Where in Ganvor are we, though?
Having manoeuvred my way successfully out of the bag, I glanced around at our new location. The gentle rolling hills confirmed that we were still in Galvia, but our precise position was indiscernible. The Oberdeen was sitting down not far away with his feet in a gurgling brook, presumably enjoying a brief respite before continuing on his travels. Mercifully, his back was towards us, so getting away wouldn't present us with too much of a problem. Algothian got down to business.
Which direction now, then?
Ramkhan presented his opinion.
Due south, I should think. We should not be going too far wrong if we keep heading southwards. Perhaps we will be bumping into more Iorians, and they can be giving us some guidance. It is a pity we do not have the cart any longer.
MacFiber observed,
We don't have a very successful record with transport, do we? Ah, well, the exercise will do us some good.
I retorted, I've had more than enough exercise already for my liking. We've done ever such a lot of walking these last few weeks. Hectus came running up with the revelation.
There's a pathway over here, sir. It looks pleasant enough.
Algothian wondered. Are we out of giant country yet, I wonder?
Tando judged.
I very much doubt it. Just look at that tortoise over there.
Turning to the fantastically sized reptile, Quilk spurted out,
Shoot me with arrows. I've never seen anything like it in all my days. Shame we can't hitch a lift on its back.
The General snorted back.
It wouldn't be very fast, though, would it? Come along, then, men. Shouldn't be too far to go now. You've all done exceptionally well, men. One final push, and we'll be back in Galamenia. Due south, then, due south.
Happily, very little of any consequence befell us during the rest of that day. We persevered through hill and valley, dale and glen, enjoying the pleasant scenery and observing every so often a wondrous marvel of nature, perhaps most notably a dazzling, sumptuous butterfly with a mighty 6-foot wingspan. As daylight began to fade, we happened upon an extended stretch of farmland, but the whole area seemed entirely deserted. An eerie silence hung about the place, with not so much as a single warble from a bird or chirrup from an insect. We passed field after field of cabbages, carrots, turnips and rhubarb, but there was not a trace of any farmhands anywhere to be seen. In time we came to a haphazard collection of buildings, the largest of which was an old empty barn with a pretty thatched roof. Quilk verbalized what we were all thinking.
So where has everyone got to, then? There must be someone about somewhere.
MacFiber murmured,
I don't like it at all. It gives me a very uneasy feeling.
The General spun things positively. This is as good a place as any to settle down for the night. At least the barn will supply us with a little warmth and shelter. The temperature's certainly beginning to drop now, isn't it?
Tando droned.
Makes you wonder, though, doesn't it? What caused everyone to abandon this place all of a sudden? A swarm of giant locusts? Some terrible deadly plague? An invasion of Oberdines?
The General growled.
Oh, do stop going on so, Tando. I'm sure there's a rather less dramatic explanation than that. Let's get ourselves comfortable then, men. Spread out the food, McFiber.
I must admit I found the barn to be rather agreeable accommodation. Relatively warm, reasonably cosy, and providing refuge from the elements, we could have done far, far worse. We sat round in a cheery circle, scoffed down our evening feast, and chatted away for quite some while. Eventually I decided it was probably time to start thinking about getting some kip, so I snuggled down in the corner of the barn, laid my head upon my bag, and dissolved into a most delicious sleep. It was long past the 3rd hour when I finally awoke from my dreams. I wondered why the General hadn't already got us all on the march. He was usually so prompt and punctual about such things. I yawned, stretched, hoisted myself up, and staggered over to the food bags, where Slank and Algothian were beginning to prepare some breakfast. Algothian hailed me with, "Morning, Professor. Beautiful morning by all appearances. Can we tempt you to a sausage or two?" I politely declined. "No, thank you, Mr. Algothian. A toasted sandwich will suffice. Where's the General, then?" Slank disclosed, "I haven't glimpsed his lordship at all yet. I assume he is taking a morning stroll and surveying the lie of the land. I dare say he'll be back soon." Algothian wasn't convinced. "He must have been gone half an hour already, mind you. At least, when I got up, he was nowhere to be seen." I reflected, most unlike him to let us sleep in for so long. Must be softening, mustn't he? Well, one can't complain at that, I suppose. MacFiber came striding in from outside and grimaced disapprovingly at the breakfast. He sighed, "What are you doing with those sausages, Slank? Leave that cooking to an expert, why don't you? We don't want to poison everyone, do we? Honestly, has anyone seen the General anywhere?" My response was, "We were just discussing that, actually. No sign of him outside, then? Most peculiar." "No sign of him at all. I've an uneasy feeling about this gentleman. It's not like the General to shoot off and not tell anyone. I don't like it at all. I think we should all go and look for him. Gather round, everyone. Wake up, Hectus. Come over here for a moment. The General seems to have vanished into thin air, gentlemen. There's only one thing for it. We must all go out and scour the area. He may be in some kind of trouble. Let's make a thorough search of the vicinity." We all filed out into the beautiful sunshine and followed our sergeant through field and meadow, being careful not to stray too far apart from one another. Just as the day before, everything was uncannily calm and quiet, with no sign of intelligent life anywhere at all. We peered round every hedgerow and examined every ditch, but the General was nowhere to be seen. It then came to our attention that we were suddenly down to 7 men. Mr. Tando had completely disappeared. MacFiber spat out, "Well, this is ridiculous. How can 2 men just disappear without a trace?" I pondered aloud. It makes one wonder which of us is going to vanish next. Frightening. Slank postulated, "There must be some rational explanation for all this. I'm sure they'll turn up sooner or later." The voice of Quilk came resounding towards us. "Look over here." He was standing at the top of a small hill, just a few yards ahead of us, and was beckoning us to come after him. He filled in the details. "It's bad news, I'm afraid. The very worst. There's an old warehouse down in the next valley. Looks like our old friend Barracus is back. He's got the General tied up and shackled to a chair. There must be about 20 enemy troops altogether. They must have snatched him during the night." Algothian shuddered. "Bad news indeed. What are we going to do?" Ramkhan contended, "There's only one thing we can be doing. We must be killing that barbarian Barracus and liberating the General, no matter what the cost. I tremble to be thinking what Barracus might do with the General in his possession." Quilk protested, "But there's at least 20 armed soldiers. What chance have we got against that lot?" Ramkhan hit back with, "I care not if there be 20 or 20,000.
The general must be delivered, and the reptile Baracus must be slain. Even if it is costing the blood of every last one of us, it will be a price worth paying. The idea of Baracus controlling a Galamine commando is too terrible to be contemplating. He must be stopped.
MacFiber concurred.
You're right, Mr. Ramcarn. We can't have that villain using our general for his own malevolent ends. The question is, how do we go about it?
Ramcarn was ready with an idea.
We are needing a distraction. Something that will be drawing away the guards from the warehouse. Then one of us can be slipping into the building unseen and putting an end to Baracus once and for all.
Slank censured the Bromian.
It seems to me that you're more interested in killing Mr. Baracus than in saving the general.
Ramcarn was emphatic.
Baracus must be stopped, friend. I have already wasted one opportunity to do so back in the jungle. I will not be wasting another. He must be paying for the crimes he has committed against the people of Ganvor, and he must be prevented from securing a Grochukan victory in this war. I will not be resting until his life is extinguished.
Quilk got practical. How'd you propose to go about distracting them, then? Could be pretty risky. Ramcarn expounded his plan.
We must be prepared to sacrifice our lives if necessary. I am with certainty prepared to lay down mine. Nevertheless, if we are being careful and cautious, it shouldn't have to come to that. All we need to be doing is setting up a series of small explosions in different parts of the farm. It is an old Baromian trick. It ought to be attracting the attention of the guards. What do you think, Sergeant? Do we go ahead?
MacFiber paused for a brief moment and gave his verdict.
Very well, Ramcarn. You can be the one to attempt the rescue. The rest of us will create the distraction for you, though you'll have to show us the best way to do it. It seems a foolhardy mission, Mr. Ramcarn. You may not return to us in one piece, but the general must be extracted. He's far too important to lose.
Slank put forward his assessment.
The general would most definitely not approve of this scheme. It seems most awfully rash and ill-advised to me.
MacFiber snapped back.
Good job you're not in charge then, Slank. We shall go ahead with the plan. Let's get back to the barn and we can start setting everything up.
In loyal obedience to our sergeant, we all turned round and began to make our way back to our nighttime refuge. Being somewhat older than the rest of the group, I soon found myself trailing behind at the rear. Then, all in a flash and without any warning whatever, I suddenly felt myself being grabbed hold of by two powerful arms and whisked clean off the path. Next moment, I was forcefully dropped behind the nearest hedge. I looked up and beheld my captor, a grim-faced, ugly-looking Grochukan. He glanced over his shoulder and heralded the news.
Got another one, Seodot. An old grandad by the look of it.
His companion signalled his approval. Beautiful. 3 down, 6 more to catch. Be careful with that one, Kevin. I think it's the Halvirandus. I'd bind his hands if I were you. Right-o then, let's take him to Baracus. Having bound me securely, the two Grochukans dragged me with minimal dignity along the pathway, brought me to the warehouse, and flung me into a small storeroom alongside Mr. Tando. Tando looked at me dismally and lamented,
They've got you too, then. Won't be long until they get the rest of us.
I fired out, Where's Montagolin?
They've taken him to another room. Said they were going to soften him up. I shudder to think what that might mean. Looks like our flight is well and truly over.
You've said that before, my dear fellow. You seem to abandon hope rather too easily, if you don't mind my saying so. We've been in tight situations before, and we've managed to wriggle out somehow or other. I'm sure there's a way out of this one, dear fellow. Stop being such a pessimist, and use your mind constructively for a change. Tando frowned and looked down pensively at the floor. Sniffing decisively, he admitted,
You're right. I give in too easily, don't I? I must have been a right nuisance to everyone on this journey. All I've done is moan and whine and whinge and complain. I've been thoroughly useless the entire time. I've been a right coward, haven't I, Mr. Jaggles? I'm utterly appalled with myself.
Well, it hasn't exactly been an easy journey, has it? Your fears and worries have been quite understandable. We've faced all manner of different terrors and foes, haven't we? It's just you do tend rather to give voice to your fears a little too frequently. It can get on one's nerves ever so slightly. Instead of always expecting the worst, why not look for a glimmer of hope and focus your mind upon that?
Easier said than done, Mr. Jaggles. But I suppose you're right. I must have been a thorn in the General's side ever since we first set out. It's time for me to stop being so pathetic. I'm truly sorry I've been such a pain and a bother, Mr. Jaggles. Let's think how we can get ourselves out of here.
That's the spirit, Mr. Tando. Constructive thinking.
What about your halver, Andy? Can we use any of that to help us?
Can't think of anything, I'm afraid. There's a whole host of tricks I can do, but none of them would get us out of these bonds, I fear. It's a shame we haven't got my brother with us. I'm sure he could think of something. He's the top expert in the whole of East Ganvor, is Quaggles. Not that he puts it to much use, mind. Bit of an idler, really. Travels around all day on his flying armchair and never really settles down anywhere. Deplorable. No, I don't think Halvey, Andy, will get us out of this one.
Is there anything in those crates, I wonder? Something sharp we could use to cut ourselves free?
I peered into the nearest one. Nothing of much use, alas. This one's full of apples.
What about that window over there? Any chance we could find a way to open it and clamber outside?
It's locked and bolted by the look of it, and I'm not sure we'd be able to run very far with our hands and feet tied up.
Well, this is useless, Mr. Jaggles. We'll never get out of here. Who are we fooling?
Now, Mr. Tando, don't slip back into your old ways. We'll come up with something, my dear fellow.
I'm sorry, Mr. Jaggles. It just seems so impossible. I'll try to stay positive.
Voice down, Mr. Tando. Here comes our old enemy. Into the room strode Mr. Barracus, smiling victoriously and looking extremely pleased with himself. He rejoiced heartily. Fabulous! Genuinely thrilled to see you, Professor. I was sorely disappointed when you didn't turn up in Uckus. You'll be able to teach me the secrets of Halvirandi now, won't you? How tremendously exciting! I snorted disapprovingly and snarled, What are you doing with the General? Back to your old plan again, are you? Barracus shook his head and opened up. Not at all, Professor. I've something far better in mind. Do you know who's just turned up in the neighbourhood, my friend? None other than Queen Hivernia herself. She's here for talks with the Macarian Council, trying to persuade them to join in the war, she is. They're meeting just a couple of miles away from you. It's given me the most terrific idea, Professor. Very soon the war will be over, and victory will finally be ours. I dread to think what you have in mind. You've every reason to, my friend. I've thought of a way I can cripple your armies comprehensively. Shall I satisfy your curiosity, Professor? You won't find it very agreeable, I'm afraid. According to our spies in Galamenia, there is great friction and discord among the 5 generals. They're all in severe disagreement over matters of military policy and strategy. Apparently, it's only the iron will of the Queen that's holding them all together. Without her, your leadership would fragment, and your whole campaign would fall to pieces. Eliminate the Queen, and chaos would result. Victory would fall into our hands. A fine theory, Mr. Barracus, but you'll never get anywhere near close enough to Her Majesty. On the contrary, my friend, I have the perfect means of gaining access to the Queen. What better way of entering her presence than in the company of the esteemed and trusted General Montagolin, her favourite by all accounts? As soon as I've persuaded the General to vouch for me, he can lead me into her presence, and I'll put an end to her reign once and for all. Your scheme gets more and more ludicrous. You'll never get the General to go along with such a plan. We shall see, Professor Jaggles. If I keep him in the dark about some of the more delicate details, I'm sure I shall soon have his cooperation. You need not fear for your own life, Professor. I have every intention of keeping you alive. I'd rather like you to teach me the secrets of your profession. I am looking forward to my first lesson. Besides, my good friend, I am not without conscience. I only kill when absolutely necessary. You will never succeed, Mr. Barracus. Your plan is full of holes. Time will tell, Professor. Time will tell. You'd best gag them for the time being, Skengvo. I'll be chatting to the General soon, and we don't want them spilling all the syrup now, do we? And so it seemed that our position in this war was now more precarious than ever. Despite my scornful comments to Barracus, I secretly suspected him to be something of a genius. The life of our illustrious monarch was now under threat, and with it the entire course of the conflict. I had no idea exactly how Baracus proposed to realize his plan, but if anyone could carry it off, I felt sure he was the man. The future of Ganvor lay in the balances, and things now seemed to be tipping in favour of the enemy.